Good to have you here. This is OmniView, episode 39 for April 29th, 2026, Balanced News Perspectives. Let's look at the day's news from every angle. King Charles addresses Congress and shares laughs with Trump at White House state dinner during historic royal visit. King Charles III became only the second British monarch to address a joint session of the United States Congress. In a 20-minute speech, he stressed the importance of the United States-United Kingdom relationship amid global uncertainty. He called for continued support for Nato and Ukraine, defended United Kingdom forces, and acknowledged victims of sexual assault. The speech drew an ovation from lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. The BBC framed the address as a timely reminder of shared democratic values between the two nations when that partnership feels especially vital. The Daily Mail highlighted what it called the hard truths delivered directly to Congress and portrayed the moment as a historic defense of traditional alliances and British institutions. The Guardian placed the speech in the context of domestic political pressure facing Prime Minister Keir Starmer, seeing the royal visit as a temporary positive distraction from Labour's current challenges. Outlets broadly agree on the content of the remarks but choose different elements to emphasize, from diplomatic continuity to contrasts with Britain's political fragility. One wonders how ceremonial speeches by heads of state actually shape public and political views of alliances over time. Another open question is where the line falls between a monarch's institutional voice and an elected government's specific policy positions. That same evening, President Donald Trump and First Lady Melania Trump hosted King Charles and Queen Camilla at a formal state dinner at the White House. The gathering included jokes, carefully chosen gifts, and notable guests ranging from athletes and business leaders to media personalities. Trump paused his own remarks to praise golfer Rory McIlroy as unconquerable, even though McIlroy had skipped a PGA Tour event at a Trump-owned course. The Daily Mail focused on the warmth and humor of the night, describing how Charles's jokes about speaking French and the Boston Tea Party reportedly left the room roaring with laughter. Coverage also noted the serendipitous name of the treasured gift presented to Trump and the overall sense of cross-Atlantic camaraderie. Other reporting placed the event in the broader frame of traditional diplomatic pageantry, continuing even amid current global tensions. The tone varies between celebratory detail and sober diplomatic context, yet the sequence of events remains consistent across accounts. It raises the thought of what role these state dinners really play in international relations beyond the policy meetings that usually dominate headlines. How much do personal anecdotes and well-timed humor ultimately color the way official visits are remembered? Shifting now to energy markets, the United Arab Emirates has left the OPEC oil cartel after 6 decades of membership. The departure comes as global markets face what observers call the biggest supply crisis in history, tied directly to the ongoing Iran conflict. Analysts have already begun speculating which other members might consider following suit. CNBC examined historical precedents for such exits and described the move as a significant blow to Saudi Arabia's leadership inside the organization. Bloomberg and Guardian reporting linked the decision to wider economic pressures created by the Middle East war, including rising costs hitting businesses and consumers. Energy-focused analysts concentrate on supply dynamics and the cartel's cohesion, while political observers interpret the exit as evidence of shifting alliances and the limits of coordinated production policy. The factual departure is not in dispute, but the weight given to market stability versus geopolitical signaling differs sharply. This leaves us asking what incentives would lead a major oil producer to walk away from a long-standing cartel arrangement, and how might one country's decision ripple outward to affect global pricing and longer-term supply security. Here in the United Kingdom, new analysis shows motorists have already faced an extra £2 billion in fuel costs at the pumps because of price spikes triggered by the Iran conflict. That total is projected to climb still higher within days. The development adds fresh pressure on Chancellor Rachel Reeves and her planned changes to fuel duty. The Daily Mail presents these rising costs as a direct hit to household budgets that could force a policy U-turn on fuel tax increases, framing it as an international crisis landing squarely on British families. Broader economic coverage connects the same price surge to wider business distress and heightened recession risks across the country. While the increase in forecourt prices is undisputed, outlets diverge on whether the immediate priority should be relief for drivers or sticking to longer-term fiscal strategy. Some voices stress the human impact on ordinary people, others the government's need to manage revenue in uncertain times. It prompts reflection on exactly how distant international conflicts find their way so quickly into domestic price changes at the local petrol station. What trade-offs does any government face when sudden external shocks collide with existing budget plans and cost of living concerns? Meanwhile, in Australia, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has ruled out introducing a new tax on existing gas export contracts in the upcoming federal budget. He called campaigns for such a levy populist and argued that the middle of a global fuel crisis is precisely the wrong moment to endanger partnerships with key Asian trading partners. The Guardian reported the decision as a deliberate choice to safeguard export relationships during an energy supply crunch, even as domestic cost of living pressures remain high. Some domestic voices had pushed for the tax as a way to raise revenue for Australian households, yet the Prime Minister's office clearly prioritizes trade stability and diplomatic ties. The policy choice itself is not contested, but the coverage reflects competing stakeholder interests between local consumers and international industry partners. Labeling certain revenue ideas as populist adds another layer to how these debates are framed. This situation highlights the competing pressures that energy policy must navigate during any global supply crisis. How should governments weigh the needs of export contracts against ongoing debates about domestic living costs? Now, to really understand several of these energy stories, there is a dimension that much day-to-day coverage leaves in the background. When conflict disrupts oil and gas flows, the immediate price response at the pump or in wholesale markets is not random. Producers, traders, and governments all operate within complex hedging contracts, inventory levels, and spare capacity calculations that can either cushion or amplify shocks. A cartel member leaving or a government refusing a new tax alters the incentives for everyone else in that chain. The mechanism is straightforward. Reduced coordination tends to increase volatility, which markets price in almost instantly. Next time you hear reports of a sudden fuel cost jump or a surprise policy announcement, ask yourself which part of the supply chain is actually absorbing or passing on the pressure, and whether the coverage is focusing on the symptom or the underlying incentive structure. In France, prosecutors are investigating the return of an adult website previously known as Coco and now operating under the name Cocoland. The platform was used by Dominique Pellicot to arrange assaults on his sedated wife, Giselle Pellicot, and has been linked to other serious crimes, including child sexual abuse and murder. The judicial examination centers on how such sites can rebrand and resume operations after high-profile convictions. France 24 coverage stresses the direct connection to one of the country's most shocking rape trials and the continuing legal scrutiny of platforms that enable organized offending. Some reporting emphasizes the specific Pellicot case, while other accounts highlight the wider pattern of serious crime facilitated online. All sources treat the site's criminal history and current reopening as established facts. The core attention lies in how authorities can effectively respond when harmful digital spaces simply change their name and return. It invites consideration of the practical challenges law enforcement faces when websites linked to grave offenses reappear under new branding. Where should the balance lie between regulating dangerous platforms and protecting broader principles of online expression? In Australia, right-wing provocateur Avi Yemeni, associated with Rebel News, has announced plans to register a Free Palestine Party. The intention is to direct preference flows toward conservative parties in Victoria's state election. The announcement has renewed debate about the state's group voting ticket system and how minor parties can influence outcomes. The Guardian presents the move as a tactical maneuver that exposes weaknesses in Victoria's electoral mechanics. Coverage notes Yemeni's background as a former Israeli soldier and YouTube commentator, framing the strategy as either legitimate political creativity or an exploitation of loopholes that can distort voter intent. Electoral reformers argue it proves the system requires legislative change, while defenders see it as democratic innovation within existing rules. The factual plan is not disputed, yet interpretations differ on whether this reveals a flaw that needs fixing. This development encourages us to examine how preference flows and group voting tickets can quietly shape final election results. What safeguards, if any, are appropriate against deliberately provocative party registrations? A new Cambridge University review of 44 existing studies suggests that stress from racism and deprivation may help explain higher childbirth mortality rates among Black women. Researchers examined markers such as oxidative stress, inflammation, and uteroplacental vascular resistance, finding consistently higher levels in Black women. The paper proposes that socio-environmental factors could be contributing to worse pregnancy outcomes through measurable physiological pathways. The Guardian reported the findings as an exclusive. presenting the identified biological mechanisms as a potential link between chronic stress and documented health disparities. Scientific coverage focuses on the review's methodology and the consistency of the biomarker data across the studies examined. Public health advocates see the work as strengthening the case for addressing social determinants of health, while some skeptics caution that more direct causal evidence is still required. The underlying data forms the common ground, but the policy weight assigned to it varies. It leaves us reflecting on how researchers can best separate correlation from causation when studying complex health disparities. How responsibly should such findings be communicated when they touch on deeply sensitive social questions? In international football, the International Football Association Board has approved a new rule that will issue a red card to any player who covers their mouth while confronting an opponent. The change aims to increase transparency and reduce hidden verbal abuse on the pitch. It will take effect at this summer's World Cup. NPR explains the measure as a practical step toward accountability, noting that covering the mouth has long been a tactic to conceal insults from referees. Football authorities support the rule on grounds of fairness and player safety. Some fans welcome it as modernization of sportsmanship standards, while others worry it could produce controversial dismissals or alter the emotional intensity of matches. The approval and its intended purpose are widely accepted, yet views differ on practical enforcement. One might ask why players developed the habit of covering their mouths in the first place, and how will referees navigate the challenge of consistent application in the heat of competition? Finally, in business news, Aston Martin Lagonda Global Holdings has reported another quarterly loss as its turnaround effort under billionaire owner Lawrence Stroll continues to face difficulties. The luxury carmaker is still struggling to gain momentum despite earlier optimism. Bloomberg frames the results as evidence that the recovery plan has yet to take hold in a challenging economic environment for specialist manufacturers. Industry observers point to the unique pressures facing high-end performance brands when consumer sentiment for luxury goods softens. Coverage notes both the persistent losses and the company's ongoing strategic adjustments. Interpretations vary on how quickly or realistically the brand can achieve sustained profitability. Some emphasize macroeconomic headwinds, others the specific execution challenges of reviving an iconic marque. This story invites consideration of what realistic timelines investors should set for corporate turnarounds in volatile sectors. How much does ownership by a single wealthy individual shape the strategic patience required? Before we go, tomorrow watch for further developments in how central banks and energy traders respond to the latest shifts in oil supply dynamics following the UAE's OPEC exit. That's OmniView. For full source links and more context, check out today's written briefing on the OmniView summaries page. As always, compare outlets, look for primary documents, and separate what's known from what's assumed. If balanced perspectives are valuable to you, share this with a friend and subscribe wherever you listen. See you tomorrow. This podcast is curated by Patrick, but generated using AI voice synthesis of my voice using ElevenLabs. The primary reason to do this is I unfortunately don't have the time to be consistent with generating all the content and wanted to focus on creating consistent and regular episodes for all the themes that I enjoy, and I hope others do as well.
Without taking the dive, we went on vacation. We had a nice time. My doomsday is